This slide series is done in memory of Dr. Edward Ross Ritvo, who passed away in June of 2020 at the age of 90 years. A pioneer in autism research, he led the field in establishing that autism was neurobiologically based. A graduate of Harvard and a U.S. Army veteran, he spent his entire academic professional career at UCLA. His work included studies of diagnosis and classification, genetics and epidemiology, as well as neurobiology and psychopharmacology. He trained generations of leaders in the field and is survived by family members and many, many students. It's an honor to dedicate this series of talks to his memory with the support of Dr. Ariella Riva Ritvo Slifka and the Alan B. Slifka Foundation.
Welcome to the Professional Educator Training Series supporting multimodal communication and AAC, Augmentative Alternative Communication. I'm Dr. Barbara Cook from the Department of Communication Disorders here at Southern Connecticut State University. In this seminar, I hope to be able to provide for you a way to describe AAC, understand, learn about, and describe low-tech, high-tech systems to support communication, and how to then use these systems to lead to a speech-generating device. Before we begin, it's really helpful to think about some terminology related to AAC. The term augmentative as the part of AAC really reflects its real meaning, which is to augment. So whenever we think about creating an augmentative communication system, we're really thinking about speech as the primary modality, and then what are we doing to augment speech? We do this every day in our day-to-day life. For example, we use stop signs to help to augment our understanding of how to navigate roadways. We use text messaging to communicate with our family and friends. Alternative communication, again, is really evidenced in the meaning of the word alternative. It really is offering or expressing a choice that would be different from the usual or conventional. So with alternative communication, quite frequently we're thinking about a mode that would be an alternative to speech, thinking about the individual as not having the capacity to use speech. So when we think of alternative forms, we actually think about all of the multimodal communication, leading us to the next terminology, that we use to express ourselves and to communicate. So we think, though, within this multimodal frame, we can think of two types, aided and unaided. Aided symbols are any extra symbols, modalities that we have to add to the person, if you will. So I might have a group of objects and have you tell me what you want by you picking up or pointing to the object that you want to play with. It can be photos, it can be picture drawings, right? It could also be text symbols, with which many are familiar with. And of course, Braille is another aided symbol. Right, so it's kind of outside of the person, and it's something the person has to physically access. Unaided symbols are the modalities of communication that we use that are part of us, right? So this would be our gestures, finger spelling, facial expressions, even vocalizations can be considered an unaided symbol that we can use to support communication. So think about this case study as I take you through the rest of this training. Max is a 12-year-old boy. He communicates using vocalizations. He has some spoken words, gestures, and pictures. And the team supporting Max is working to decide which modes of communication will be the most effective, that will be the easiest, right? Lead to the ease of use, so they'll be the easiest for him to use, and can result in access to peers and school-related activities. So what is AAC exactly? Well, first and foremost, it is not a thing. It is not a device. A device might be one mode of communication that is incorporated into an individual's AAC communication. But AAC in and of itself is not a device. I want you to think about AAC as more like a set of procedures and processes that we use to maximize functional and effective and efficient communication for an individual. We think about the ways that we can supplement or replace natural speech and or writing. As I mentioned in the previous slide, when we think about AAC, we are really thinking about all modes of communication. So that would include technology and devices, but it's not solely a device or technology. So when you're asking or you're thinking about the students that you work with, your question should not be, what AAC device do they use? Instead, you should ask, what is the AAC system that has been designed? And that system should include maybe a device or a tool, but it also should include what vocalizations are we thinking that we're going to accept? What facial expressions or gestures will we continue to encourage? Again, trying to maximize functional communication, but that's also efficient and easy for the client or the student. If we try too hard to push a mode of communication that is not easy and efficient, the student is likely not going to use that mode, and they'll revert sometimes to the modes that we've been trying to have them not use, such as reaching, hitting, or grabbing. When I think about an AAC system and this idea of multiple modalities, I also want to think about why. What is the function? What is the purpose? Of course, everybody starts with helping the individual be able to make a request to meet their needs and wants. That's critical, right? I want my student to be able to tell me what they want to eat, what they want to play, where they want to go, for sure. I certainly even want them to be able to tell me when they have a specific need, if they have a headache, they don't feel good. But that's just one level, one layer of communication. We also have to think about, how is the individual going to use their system to share information with others, to develop and maintain relationships with people, and engage in social interaction. And it's these three areas that are also critical to being in a classroom and being academic, if you will, or being a learner. The last one we seldom think about. I can kind of look to the sky and think about what I'm going to do at the end of today. And I can reflect on how my day has gone. And I can also use language in my mind to remind and reminisce. So we also have to think about, how can our AAC system support an individual in being able to communicate with themselves? Because remember, this AAC system is to help to generate language, to help to support the use of language. And it is through that use of language that we can think and self-reflect. So let's think about a school. Of course, learning requires communication. Can you think of the multiple opportunities when your students want to communicate, and kind of when they must do these following things? So think about a school day. When do they need to express what they need and what they want? What are the opportunities for sharing information? I want you to really reflect on this one for a little bit. What are the opportunities to establish and maintain relationships with peers and teachers? Do they have the communication tools to do this? Can you imagine the ways in which an AAC system could be specifically designed to make sure that the person can engage in relationships with peers and teachers and to engage in social interaction? And lastly, think about your setting and think about the expectation of all students in reflecting and rehearsing quietly to themselves. And yet, how many self-talk, right, whisper to themselves as they're trying to think through a problem? How can we use an AAC system to support this same kind of self-talk or thinking for our students? Now I want you to think about your students and those who cannot effectively and efficiently use speech. What modes do they use? It would be critical to create a list. Think about every opportunity that your student has communicated and what mode did they use to communicate. Even if they use an unconventional gesture, hitting. If it was communicating, it's important to note that and know what that purpose of that communication was. What was the person trying to do? I once worked with a young boy who on the playground, that was kind of the report, that he ran around hitting all of the other children. When you observed the situation, it very quickly became obvious that this young boy did not have the understanding of body proximity, not a good mode of communication for him at that point in time. And his running up and hitting was his way of initiating that he wanted to play. This young boy could speak, but he did not have the language, right? So we needed to support the verbal language for him to say that he wanted to play with his peers. The hitting reduced dramatically. So understanding a modality that someone uses to communicate and the function of that is so incredibly important. Recognizing when our students can write or if they can read writing. We sometimes infer that an individual who has less understanding of language or doesn't speak incomplete sentences, that mode might not be accessible to them. However, on numerous occasions, I've met individuals who are able to write and read sufficiently enough that we can use that as a mode of communication. So, of course, the next question you have to ask yourself is, how do you know which mode of communication to support? This is where the team comes in. Right, so the team has to do this as step one. What are the modes of communication? How does the student currently meet these needs? Or do they? Are they able to engage in expressing needs and wants or sharing information or reflecting and rehearsing quietly to themselves? The second step is that the team will have used that information and created an AAC system. So it would be at this stage that you want to then familiarize yourself with this AAC system. So what are the aided and unaided symbols that have been identified for the individual? So for unaided, is there a recommendation for some level or use of gestures or sign? From an aided perspective, is the individual using symbols that are the most transparent? What I mean by that is the most obvious. So if I took, you can go to the drugstore and you can purchase little miniature travel kits. So imagine that I have an individual and we're trying to support communication. I might be able to get all those miniatures and put them on a board and have them point to or give me the miniature to let me know that they want the toothpaste or that they want to go brush their teeth, right? So the most transparent is toothpaste means brush my teeth. I could go to a less transparent and have a picture, as you see here, of the person giving another person a gift, but maybe what that picture is supposed to mean is just give, right? So it could be give me the toothpaste. Then you can see the next picture, which is even less transparent. So sure, it's a line drawing of a hand with a gift on top, and it could mean give again. Understanding that gifts are things that we give to people. So notice the abstractness of that concept. So we have to be sure that whatever system the individual has, that the symbols match their level of understanding. Many of you will be familiar with the next symbol, and that is of the man and the woman, and the man has like a green box and a gift with an arrow pointing to the woman. This comes from the picture exchange communication system from Boardmaker, and is a commonly used symbol. It's important to understand that some of the symbols that we use are clear to us because we have the language understanding. We have the ability to understand the abstract nature of some of these symbols. Our students do not always have that understanding. So it's really important to familiarize yourself with the system and ask the team who put together the system, what is the level of symbols that this individual can understand, can comprehend? The last picture is of the little stick figure, and this comes from the system called Lesson Picks. Again, notice there is a distinct difference in the way that picture looks to mean give compared to even the photo of the person giving a gift. Another part of familiarizing yourself with the AAC system is understanding what level of technology has been recommended for these symbols. There are two types. I'm going to talk about low tech. Some people talk about 3 in the mid, but I like to just talk about it in the frame of low tech and high tech. So a low tech device is usually, it's something that is fixed or static. What does that mean? It means it doesn't move. So you see on the picture on the right of a board that has words and pictures. This is a flat, if you will, board that's been laminated with core vocabulary that is understood by the individual who owns that system. It can be written words, as you see. They can be categorized in a variety of ways. It also can be picture books. So on the very far right, you'll see a representation of a picture exchange communication system book. So these are considered low tech. They're not electronic. Always the goal, if a system like this works for an individual, we do typically start low tech first to see if the child or the student can understand the symbols, if they can understand the ways in which to use those symbols, whether they're only going to have to point to pictures or if they have to actually pick up, peel, and put on a sentence strip, which is part of the PEC system, and hand them to us. But our goal would always be to shift from those low tech because they can tend to be cumbersome. Sometimes a PECS book, for example, can sometimes result in up to 20 and 30 pages of pictures. And for our students who can navigate 20 or 30 pictures, we start to think about, would they be able to navigate a more high-tech electronic system that would automatically flip pages for them? So that's the next level of technology, is this high tech. Is the system set up for the individual to actually have a more complicated dynamic display like an iPad with Prolo Quota Go, or a Tobii system that can be on an iPad or look very similar to an iPad? Or is the individual kind of in a shift mode, right? So they are having some low-tech static board, and maybe they're slowly making the shift to high-tech. So they might have a talker, which, as you can see in this picture with the with the 9 cells, it would allow 9 pictures to be displayed, and the individual can push on the picture and hear a voice to make a communicative message, right? After you've learned, is this individual using low-tech, high-tech, or a combination, because they might have a combination depending on the settings, the next part of familiarizing yourself, and probably maybe one of the most important, is understanding how the symbols are organized on the system. We usually think of the systems, low-tech or high-tech, of having the pictures and the words oriented in what we call a grid display. So you can see the example at the end of the string here. And this example is showing rows and columns of the vocabulary, hence a grid display. In a high-tech device, the grid display may look exactly like this. The benefit is that I could push one button that could then open up a brand new grid display of additional vocabulary. Grid displays are usually organized in one of these 3 ways. Sometimes they're organized by the schematic or the activity. So the vocabulary on page 1, for example, might be only vocabulary for the home. Then a second page, if it's a high-tech device, might only be vocabulary for the preschool classroom. The other ways that the vocabulary can be organized is by we call it taxonomic, and that has to do with the ways in which we teach categories in school. I suspect that many of you have seen systems that are organized in this manner. So for example, there is a button for food, there's a button for toys, there's a button for storybooks that are to be read. And the final way that these grid displays can be organized is through what we call semantic syntactic pairings. Essentially, it means that the system is set up by parts of speech and word order. So you may have one quadrant might be the nouns, another quadrant might be the verbs, a third quadrant might be the adjectives. For any of these grid displays, the individual has to be able to have a conceptualization of categorization. So for some of our students, these grid displays are not always successful or take time for the student to learn. So the more you're familiar with the system, the more likelihood you're going to be able to guide and support your student. The second type of systems in terms of organizing symbols is something called visual scene display. In my own experience, I have not seen folks taking advantage of the system as much as I think that they should, especially when we think about our younger individuals who need to have an alternative communication system. Most individuals don't really develop the capacity for the grid system much before the age of 5 or 6 because of this idea of categorization and what's happening to the development of language. So a visual scene display can compensate for that because most children experience their world organized by scenes, right? So they can think about where they are in their kitchen, or in this pictorial example, what their bathrooms look like or what their classrooms look like. And so if I say to a young child, 3 or 4, it's time to take a bath. This is probably going to be the visual representation that appears for them, not necessarily the things we use to take a bath or the things we use to brush our teeth, right? So they don't have that level of organization. The benefit of a visual scene display is that you can have either a drawing like this or an actual photo of the real setting that the student is familiar with. And the technology allows you to create what are called radio buttons. That just means where you'll push on the screen. And once the child pushes on that area, so for example, maybe they have to go to the bathroom, and so they could see this scene and actually push on the toilet to indicate that they have to go to the bathroom. So it really provides a more concrete, in the moment, here and now scenario for communicating. Of course, some of our individuals who can read but cannot speak may benefit from keyboarding, right? And so we think about 2 ways of creating a keyboard. One is the QWERTY. That's a typical keyboard. I actually find it fascinating. We don't necessarily think about the keyboard that we use for typing on our computers as having a name like QWERTY. And if you were not familiar, I'll just direct you, when you look at your keyboard, if you look up to the left and you go right underneath the numbers, you'll see QWERTY. Those are the first letters reading from the left to the right. Alphabet boards are less common. They might be more helpful for children who know their alphabet, and less helpful for older individuals who have learned how to do keyboarding. Finally, it's important to understand that most of the time, there is a hybrid system that has been designed. And that hybrid system can be any combination of all of these together. Now there are systems, an iPad is a really good example, that I can have a Prolo Quotago with a grid display. I can have the app called Scene Speak and have some scenes that might be able to be used by the individual. And it has a keyboard function as well. So now you have an idea of the important components that have to be in an AAC system, the importance of really learning the system that your student is using. And of course, it's not enough to just know what's in their system. You have to be able to use it too. So let me share it this way. When we were young and we were learning to speak, we had models all around us, people speaking all the time. So it stands to reason that we would be able to pick up on the use of speech, provided that we didn't have some kind of a neurological or environmental impact preventing us from doing that. When we have students who can't use speech and have to use an alternative augmentative system, we have to recognize there are no models for them for these unusual systems, right? So if you really pause and think about it, when's the last time that you were out in a community environment or in your own home and somebody was using a static communication board, a PEX book, an iPad to communicate? And so if you can practice to learn and use the system of your students, then you'll be able to model that system for the students. We never want to remove the communication system from the student. If we're going to model, we want to have it next to the student and modeling with them, because we do want to think about that system as their voice, right, as their mode of communication. However, it's critical that you know how to use the system, and in fact, maybe more effective and efficient than your student, so that you can model that effectiveness and that efficiency. Also, if you practice using the system, you'll begin to discover there's nothing on this system that will allow my student to engage in a social relationship or social interaction with their peers. So it also provides you the opportunity to communicate to the team of the need for vocabulary and information to be on the system to allow that to happen. It's also important to remember that if you are going to engage on helping an individual use their system, that communication's not static, that for every interaction that we have, there's some form of greeting. That greeting could be a tap on the shoulder, sure. It could be, hey, but there's always a way that we let the person know that we want to talk to them. We also typically put in a little bit of small talk. You know, the hey, how are you? What's up? Right? It could even be a momentary comment about what we're doing in the moment. Could be a smile. It doesn't even have to be a full sentence, if you will. And then every interaction has a purpose, right? So I call that the story, but that purpose could be to make that request. That purpose could be to say, hey, you want to play a game, right? It could be to ask a question. And then, of course, every interaction has a closing. It has a goodbye. It could just be thanks or see ya, right? So it's really important that when you're working with students who have this AAC system, that you're always thinking about these 4 components and make sure they're part of every interaction. So let's go back to Max. Remember, Max is the 12-year-old boy who uses vocalizations, some spoken words, gestures, and pictures to communicate. And our goal for Max is to support speech by using low-tech, single-page communication boards designed for each of his daily activities. In the following example, I'm sharing with you how Max can use his AAC system to interact with his occupational therapist using requesting and sharing of information during the session. Please note the use of the greeting, the small talk, the purpose, and the goodbye. It's a critical part of this communication system for Max.
Here is Max's communication board. It has yes, no, more, all done, who, what, where, when, so he can ask questions. And then down below, we see the key vocabulary that has been determined to be the most important for him to be able to engage in an interaction with his occupational therapist, Carly, and his peers, Cody and Olga. Max enters the therapist's space. We want him to immediately say hi to Carly. And then maybe we want to encourage him to say, to look, right? So Carly, look, it's the frog swing. Right? So in a communication static board, normally he's pointing to these pictures, but I want to pull them up into this space so you can see how we are going to build and develop some of this communication using this board. So after he tells Carly, look, swing, Carly can then acknowledge using her own language to say, yeah, look at the swing. And she might even use the board to ask him, do you want to go to the swing? And then we hope that Max will use the board to respond, not just to say yes, but maybe to say a more complete sentence or phrase of, I want to go to the frog swing. We can also help Max by increasing some of his adjectives to use. And maybe he says, I want to go fast on the frog swing. And then maybe in another instance, have him indicate that he wants to go slow on the frog swing. So I want to go slow on the frog swing. All the while, it will be important for Carly to model the use of this communication system so that Max uses it, is comfortable using it, and recognizes that this is going to be the way that will help him to be able to access the activities that he likes to do when he's in occupational therapy. At the end of a session, we want to have a concluding goodbye, if you will. So we would want to encourage Max to say, I'm all done. And then using his vocalization that we know he has to say goodbye and leave the session. So he could say, I'm all done. Bye, Carly, or bye-bye, Carly. And at this point, it could be a fun opportunity for Carly to create one of the more familiar ways that we say goodbye. So it could be, see ya, Max, or see you next week, instead of that very formal goodbye.
As you can see, we use the static communication board for Max. The goal will be to transfer his skill with this communication board to a more high-tech device in the future, potentially one that has some speech generating features. Thank you for listening and engaging in this presentation. I'd like to share that there will be additional presentations that you can access, and we invite you to visit our website. We always welcome your engagement and your support, and contributions can be made through our website. Once again, thank you for listening